Hi, I'm Jo Kiminade and I'm speaking with John Knorr, CEO and founder of SIS Business Systems. Today we're talking about a document that John has put out for Uglii and World Trade, which you can have a look at uglii.com and ugliiforbusiness.com, John.
Uglii with two eyes.
Yes, Uglii with two eyes.
Yep.
So tell us a bit about the document. What's its purpose?
Jo, it was really in response to governments talking to us about how Uglii is going to facilitate trade around the world and trade development organisations in response to their inquiries of us about how we're going to be able to help trade. So it's really trying to put in a fairly concise document the ways that our systems will help. It's not complete, but it's a good guide for people who want to get a bit of an understanding. Yeah.
Right. So give us a bit of an overview of how Uglii discoverability facilitates trade.
Jo, look, Uglii discoverability for an economy basically means that the economy can be seen by anybody outside the economy, which basically, of course, means that the business inside can be seen and they can be contacted and products and services can be bought for them. Now, the obvious examples of industries that need that exposure is the tourism industry, for example.
Sure.
But also others, and what Uglii generally does is provide discoverability for all businesses, every business in every economy. So what we're doing is just lifting the standards of discoverability for all business on a level playing field. So our systems make discoverability for every business quite easy and fair, and if somebody's looking from outside the economy, they can see exactly what business provide which services in the economy, and therefore they're discoverable. So that by itself will be a big lift to most economies, because most businesses in most economies don't have good discoverability. It's as simple as that.
So it's going to aid growth within
It's going to aid growth, and it's going to, because an economy can be seen from outside the economy, that means it's got greater prospects of people buying the products and services from that economy, which of course means trade. So, yep.
Right. Okay, and how about specifically Uglii brands?
Uglii brands allows a trademark, and we call that a brand, to list under the products or services that it provides in its economy. And that process, of course, means that brand is discoverable through the search processes of the Uglii brand system. That's good in itself because it means that brand, somebody looking for that brand of that products and service around the world can see that brand as a supplier of that product and service in its country. Now, there's another facility that we don't talk about a lot in our general literature, and that's the ability of a brand to also do what we call a flag listing, which allows it to list in another economy that it wants to have some visibility in.
Right.
So it's a bit like saying, look, we exist, we're not in your economy, but we exist, and if you want to buy the product or service that we're talking about, you can buy it from us in our country.
Yes.
Okay, so, and we call it a flag listing because a little flag comes up to say this business is from Australia. If it's the Australian business representing itself in the US economy or in the Chinese economy, or Chinese business in the US economy, whatever it means.
Sure.
We put a little flag there and a notation that where that brand is from.
Right.
So that the user of that website is not getting confused about the origins of that that brand.
Sure.
Okay, so it's clearly from another country.
Okay.
Now, of course, with our system, it's the nature of that system that only people are going to use that system that are looking for a particular product or service. So the system is very precise. So if I'm looking for a particular bit of engineering equipment, then it's only going to show that bit of engineering equipment. It's only going to show the brands that manufacture that bit of engineering equipment, wherever they come from. So it's very powerful, and it facilitates exports because I can be looking at that from anywhere in the world. I can be looking into any economy from anywhere in the world.
In any language?
In any language. We'll come to languages a bit later on.
Sure.
Okay, but at the moment, it's all in. As we make this video, it's all in English, but very soon it'll be in Chinese and English, and then Spanish and Chinese and English and so on.
Right.
Okay, so what it's basically doing is allowing the people who are interested in looking at that particular product to see all of the manufacturers in the world for that particular product.
Right. And with these flag listings, John, what sort of cost is involved? Is it expensive?
No, it's very affordable. It's the same cost as a brand pays for a listing in its own country. So if it's paying $10 for a listing, which is the highest fee that we charge, which is for a year,
Right.
okay, so it's very affordable.
So they can go into any economy with their product, with their brand, for $10 for a year.
Effectively, yeah. Yeah,
Wow.
that's right, yeah.
Wow.
So it's a very powerful thing, and the idea of it, of course, is to cut away those huge costs of penetrating another economy with a product or service, which for a lot of, say, small manufacturers or boutique manufacturers of specialised bits of machinery, for example,
Yes.
it's just prohibitive.
Yes.
It's just impossible at the moment. But with the Uglii processes, I can get penetration for my product and service into any economy that I want to trade with for $10. So it's a very, very powerful system, and really quite revolutionary in terms of its ability to provide very precise marketing for $10 into the economy that business is nominating. So it's very good.
Sure.
So effectively, I can list my brand in my home economy, and then spend another $2,000, I suppose, buying a listing in every other economy in that same position in the taxonomy.
Right.
So.
Now, Uglii Brands facilitates trade through the use of trademarks. How does that differ from brands?
Well, trademarks and brands are an interchangeable term. We tend to use the word brands in Uglii, but we're meaning trademarks. So,
Right.
So, what that system does is it only allows a trademark or an organisation that's going through the process of registering a trademark before they can use the system. So they need to have registered a trademark or begun the process of registering a trademark in their economy before they can come in and use that Uglii Brands facility.
Right.
Okay, so there's a bit of a qualification. Not every business in the economy can use that facility. They've got to own a trademark that relates to the products and services
Right.
that they produce. So, or have applied for that.
Yep.
Now, once they've done that, then they've got permission effectively to buy those listings for $10 per listing.
Okay. Legitimate.
Yeah.
How do we pronounce it?
Legitimate, I think, is the way to do it.
And that facilitates trade also? How does that
Yeah,
fit in?
that does. That's really a facility that allows governments to come into the system and list fairly simply the rules and regulations that relate to a number of different aspects of a product or service. So it could be export or import regulations or quotas or customs or tariffs, incentives for the production of a product or service, all sorts of things, regulations on investment in a product or service. So what that system is doing is providing an encapsulated list of all of the regulations and rules that relate to a product or service in that economy.
Within the government?
Well, rules and regulations by their nature are put in there by government. So
Right.
it's only governments that can go into that system and use that system.
And any form of government, local,
No,
provincial?
at the moment we're limiting it national governments and state or provincial governments, but we do have a proposal to bring in a lower level of it that also allows for
Local
local governments to impose, identify their regulations that they're going to impose on say, a particular industry or a particular product or service in their municipality.
Sure.
At the moment, it's just at those two levels of government, but it's all together. So state governments and federal governments or national governments can put their regulations in, and it's all there in relation to each of those topics.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
So it's very clear.
Yep.
Now, I must stress that what we're asking governments to do there is not put in the whole chapter and verse of their legislation and regulations. They can simply create a link to it. So it's got to
Right.
be clickable for an investor or a business wanting to trade or export or import or whatever they want to do, to be able to get all the information from a link to that government. So we're not asking them to transfer. We don't want all that information.
Right.
We're about creating, assembling and ordering the information in a nice, workable way.
Sure. You've said here it's the idea is to have a one-stop shop for all such information. So that's basically for investors or whatever to just find everything they want in this one place.
Look, it's very hard, and governments talk about these ideas, but of course nothing ever really happens. So what we've done is provide a template, a system, and it's free for government. So we're not trying to make money out of these things. What we're trying to do is help governments get their house in order so that they can fairly and honestly say to business and investors and the people that should be interested in this information, this is how you do it. This is what you've got to comply with, or this is all the information you need in a nutshell, in an elegant and systematic format. Now, the importance of that, of course, in relation to trade, is that they can see export quotas or restrictions or whatever they may be, or import tariffs, customs, quarantine issues, all of the things that add costs to, say, the import of a product or service from another country.
Yep.
And they can see it from the exporter's point of view and the importer's point of view, so they can get that information comprehensively before they start to do any
so it certainly
exporting or importing.
Facilitate trade, just having that information at hand.
Yeah, and also it has great benefits for investors too. If somebody wants to invest in an area that they're expert in their own economy and think, well, we might try and invest in the provision of this product or service in another economy, then they can see all that information in one spot. The other thing about that facility is that they can click from country to country too and see compare countries, which is fairly exciting.
Yes. Oh, so of course they can compare the costs of exporting to one country to another, and
that's right. If I'm a business that wants to import inputs into my business, the ingredients or the inputs that I want to go into my business, then I can see and I can compare the problems that I'm having with having to pay tariffs compared to what my competitors in another country
might be doing.
So it also helps me put some pressure on the government to say, look, how about we bring the tariffs down on this thing, because you're causing us to have difficulties competing with our next door neighbours, because you're increasing the cost of the inputs of our business. So the system has got some side benefits in that we think that it'll tend to make tariffs lower around the world too.
Rightio.
But anyway, that's a different subject. But it all relates to facilitating trade, of course.
Uglii Spatial B2B and B2C marketplace systems, how do they facilitate trade?
Well, those systems are about buyer putting up their hand electronically to buy a product or service. Those systems operate globally, so they're agnostic to where the supplier has come from or wants to supply from. So they're geographic in the sense that it allows the supplier to define the catchments into which it wants to supply.
Yes.
And if the buyer's in a catchment that it wants to supply into, then its offers get automatically or manually sent to that buyer. Now, the importance of that, of course, is that for $1, which is the cost of making an offer in that system, I can make an offer to a buyer somewhere in the world that I don't know initially, that I never knew existed initially, and so I'm really buying a trade opportunity, a qualified lead for an export sale for $1. So it's very, very affordable marketing on behalf of potential exporters or existing exporters.
And the importance it is a qualified lead. They've expressed an interest in that product. So,
absolutely. You're not randomly marketing my product to the whole internet. It's somebody has expressed an interest in buying a product or service, and they've quantified that, and they've probably specified how they want to pay for it. And all of that stuff, so it's very much a qualified lead. So the system is actually providing a qualified lead for $1, which is a lovely idea.
Yes.
and of course that means it's an export qualified lead, or can be an export qualified lead as well.
Sure.
So this is making the world a very small place in terms of how the internet works for businesses that want to export.
Right.
If I'm just going back to the example of a small manufacturing organisation that manufactures specialised equipment, say for industry, then they need global access to the global marketplaces for those specialised products or services. In this case, a manufactured good, because they're niche areas of production, not like producing motor cars where there's a mass market.
Yes.
What the system is doing is providing the ability to penetrate all markets effectively, or be known in all markets easily, effortlessly for $1. So it's a very powerful system.
How does the Uglii Global Business Number facilitate trade?
Well, the Uglii Global Business Number is really about facilitating confidence or building confidence. And what that does, let me just qualify that by saying that when a business comes into the Uglii system, it gets a number, and the number is made up of a number of elements. The first is that it has the name of the country in which it is a legal entity as the first part. Then there is a number that relates directly to that legal entity. So if it's a company, then there is a number that relates to that. And then there may be divisions of that company. So it identifies the division of that company that somebody's dealing with. And it also identifies what we call the ugly dots, which is the place of business that they might be dealing with. So somebody's getting an offer from another organisation overseas, they must be registered in the system, and the offer is conveying this in a coded form, this information to them about who they are. Right. Now the recipient of that offer can click on the Uglii Global Business Number and see all of the information that's relevant to that business, depending on where he clicks along the number.
So it's basically verifying that they're registered in the system.
Well, it's doing a bit more than that. Yeah, certainly they've registered in the system and they've been verified in the system. So there's an elevated confidence. It's giving the potential buyer a greater confidence that this is a real business, and that it's been through the processes of Uglii of becoming verified in the system, and it's effectively showing how big the business is, and where its places of business are. So it's easy enough for somebody to pick up a phone and call up those places of business and see that if they exist, for example, if somebody wants to do some checking back.
Sure.
And the system's smart enough so that if that business number system is smart enough so that if you click on a particular part of that, it will give you the information that relates to that element of that.
Right. So you can define it.
Yeah, or it'll show you all the uglies, all the places of business of that business in its economy.
Sure.
So, so it's just the whole thing's about confidence building, so that the buyer is confident about who he's dealing with at the other end.
Right.
So, yeah, and of course that facilitates trade. Trade's about confidence and.
Sure.
And
if you know you're doing business with
somebody reputable.
That's right. Yeah. Okay. Uglii is a system supporting trade liberalisation. Can you explain how that works, what it means?
Sure. Up till now, the pressures for trade liberalisation, the pressures for reducing tariffs, for example, has always come from the supply side. So an exporter from one country wanting to penetrate another country's markets tries to put pressure on the recipient country's markets or governments to reduce tariffs. Now, there's no political connection between the two, of course.
Got no clout
they've got no clout in that. That's
economy.
Right. Yeah. What the Uglii system is doing is really shifting that equation so that the importer has got some clout. Now, it might be an importer that's importing because he wants to use the import as an input into his business to reduce reduce the cost of his business so he can be more profitable, or he can compete on export in other export markets.
Right.
So what the system is doing is making the costs, the imposts of tariffs more real and more visible within the economy. So it allows the importer to be more articulate, I suppose,
Yes.
in asking within its own country to see those tariffs come down.
Right. Okay.
What happens in most countries is the reason tariff barriers are there is because there's a lobby group or something, lobbying that there be a tariff there to protect them. In that economy, there's always the downside of that means that the inputs, the companies that use that product or service as an input, have to pay more for it.
Right.
Okay?
Yep.
So this system is really switching it around to become pressure can be put on governments from the demand side rather than the supply side.
Okay, so John, we touched earlier about languages and you said we'd get back to that. Can we get back to that?
The Uglii brand system describes in English at the moment 700,000 products or services. Now that's a very powerful system. The disadvantage of it at the moment is that it's only viewable in English, so that the business that's dealing with it and using it needs to be able to read English.
Yeah.
The beauty of the system is that each of those descriptions relates back to a number, which is hidden, but it means that we can have that number relating to a variety of languages.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
Effectively means that if you're reading this in Chinese, then you can see every business in the world in Chinese, the products and services of every business in the world in Chinese.
Right.
If when the Spanish version starts, every Spanish reading person in the world will be able to see the whole economy in our system in Spanish.
Right.
And Germans in Germans.
Okay.
And now.
So the number remains the same. If books were number 473, that's what they are in every language.
That's right. They're always relating back to
That one number.
Yeah, it doesn't matter what the descriptor you're reading, it's relating back to the same product and service.
Sure.
So a business is effectively relating to that number when it's putting in that product or service for its discoverability of its business.
Sure.
Okay, which means that it's discoverable through any language for which we have done a translation of the 700,000 descriptions.
Right.
Now the problem with those descriptions is that they've got to be legally correct because they're the basis of doing business transactions. So we can't just use any old automated translation services. They've got to be done very carefully and by people who understand that part of the industry and so on. So they've got to be very precise, which means that they're expensive.
Yes.
Costs us somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million to do a translation of those 700,000 lines.
Right.
Now, that brings up that there is an opportunity for governments and other organisations that want to sponsor a language to sponsor a language in the system, help us pay for the introduction of a particular language into the system.
Which would obviously be their own economy, their own language.
Yeah, and of course there's a lot of prestige with that, and the system allows them to get some kudos out of that process. So any time that a person uses that language, it says it's being provided. This language facility in Uglii is being provided by the such and such government.
Right.
Okay. So it's a real prestige thing to have a language.
And is that sponsorship only available to governments? Is it?
No, organisations generally. So a major bank may want to do it, or somebody else. But yeah, we're not fussy about who we take money from. What it's really about is trying to encourage the facilitation of the translations of those languages.
Sure.
Now, from an economic development point of view and from a political point of view, that might be very important for a government, particularly if it's got minority languages in its economy and it benefits from being seen to be supporting the economies of those minority languages, the businesses of those minority languages.
Right.
So it's an ideal opportunity for smart governments to get into the system and for them to derive some economic development benefits in their economy, because that enables people to use the system comprehensively locally.
Yes.
But it also means that their part of their economy is better viewable by the rest of the whole world. So
Right.
it's a very powerful opportunity for governments to help the world build Uglii into the system that it should ultimately be to help trade and economic development around the world. So
Okay, all right.
it's an ideal opportunity for smart governments.
All right, John. Well, thanks for talking to me today. If you're interested in finding out more about how Uglii can facilitate trade, go to Uglii, that's uglii.com, or ugliiforbusiness.com. Thanks very much, John.
Thanks, Joe.